persistent remoting, PSSessions. Now, so far, everything we've done in PowerShell remoting has been using ad hoc sessions. We actually spin up a copy of PowerShell on the remote computer, use it for a second, and then it shuts itself down. Now I'm going to show you how to create a session that stays running on the remote computer and talk about some ways that you might want to use that. These are actually going to line us up for some really cool stuff with some of the other remoting techniques. We'll start with some basic session management information as well as some details on using sessions. And if you happen to be using PowerShell version 3 or later, you can take advantage of a new feature called disconnected sessions, and I'll also show you how to use that. Now, I kind of want to emphasize that we've been using sessions all along. We started on a local computer. We went to one or more remote computers. Now, every single time we did that, whether we did it one-to-one using enter PSSession or one-to-many using invoke command, each remote computer started up a copy of PowerShell, did whatever we told it to do, and then spun down that copy of Windows PowerShell. So we've been using sessions. In fact, that's why it's called enter PSSession. So if I do this, go off to my domain controller here, I now have a copy of PowerShell running on that remote computer. In fact, I can show it to you. We'll run get process on that remote computer. And down here, web services for management provider host. So WSM prov host tells me I've got a copy of PowerShell. That's actually the process that is hosting the PowerShell engine. If I exit this, that session automatically spins down. I'll use a different technology. I think this uses the remote registry service to, we'll see if this works. You'll notice that WSM prov host is gone. You do invoke command, the same thing happens. Invoke command, script block, get process on computer name dc.lab.pri. There's my WSM prov host. But now that I have started that session, run the command, disconnected, and ended that session, WSM prov host is no longer running. So what we've been doing then are what I call ad hoc sessions. They're sessions that you spin up and you use immediately, and then they shut themselves down. And that's fine. You might do most of your remoting that way in PowerShell. Nothing wrong with it. But there is a certain amount of overhead in spinning up the session and shutting it down. So if you plan to use the session multiple times within some period of time, it might make sense just to get it up and running and leave it up and running. Also, some of the other cool things I'm going to be showing you, like implicit remoting, require that the remote computer have a persistent session, one that's running all the time, or at least for a long period of time. So the easy way to get this going is a new PS session. So that now contains one session. The DC variable, and I only called it DC because it's a quick way to remind myself that it contains a session to my domain controller. I could also do multiples. So if I run get PS session, this will actually show me all of the open sessions. It's open and available. Now, if you remember from the previous nugget, there is an idle timeout. If I leave this sit long enough, those will eventually go to unavailable because it'll shut them down on the remote computer because I haven't been using them. So let's look at some ways I could use these. Enter PS session. Instead of providing a computer name, I'll provide a session object. And that quickly gets me to my DC. When I exit and back on my local computer run get PS session, you can see that my DC is still there. I'm actually running 2 copies of WSM prov host on DC, right? Because I opened the one to put into the DC variable, and then I opened another one that's sitting in the servers variable. In fact, let's get process computer name dc.lab.pri. You can see there's 2 copies of WSM prov host. So every user and every connection each user has results in one of those things running. You can see they're not using a ton of memory. 575 megs of virtual RAM. The paged memory is just what is this, 54 megs? That's not that bad. So that's a kilobyte number? Yeah. Anyway, it's not that much memory. And they will idle themselves out after a while. So invoke command accepts the same thing. Let's just give it the sessions in my servers variable. So that's 2. And we'll give it a script block. Let's just get a directory and see what users have got directories. There we go. So once you're done using a particular session, you can just pipe it to remove PSSession, and that'll close it. Oops. So you can see that I now only have the one open. If you want to shut everything down, just do that. Session. There we go. So now I have no more sessions actively running on the computer. You don't have to do that. You can certainly just close the PowerShell window. That will take care of removing all the sessions from memory. In most cases, the remote version of that will shut down pretty quickly. In fact, let's try that out. Let's do a new PS session. Now, I'm not going to put the session into a variable this time, and there's a reason for that. Lab.pri. I want to show you how you can work with these without using variables. So that's open. I'm going to open a new copy of PowerShell. Sessions are not shared across copies of PowerShell. So that means I'm going to be able to use this version to check and see what's running on the remote computer. And you can see at the end of the list, WSM prov host is there. Now, obviously, I think if I do a get PS session, remove PS session, that should get rid of WSM prov host. All right, so let's spin it back up again. The poor computer's probably like, would you decide if you want a session or not? Okay, WSM prov host, so it's running. Now I'm just going to close this shell. Boom, gone. Let's quickly see. Now, WSM prov host is running over there because I did not explicitly remove it. And my guess is that that's probably going to continue staying there until it idle times out on the other computer, on the remote machine. So that's something you do want to be aware of. Now that I've disconnected, so the copy of the shell that knew about this is gone, there's no way here in PowerShell version 2 for me to reconnect to that. It's just going to have to sit there. Now, alternately, I could kill it. I can't really use stop process for that because it doesn't accept a remote computer name. But there's other techniques. I could use WMI or something like that to go get that process and kill it. I could probably also stop the WinRM service, although that would interrupt other people's connections. Anyway, practical upshot here is it's a little bit of a bad idea to just close the shell as a means of disconnect because it is going to force that thing to sit there in idle timeout. Now, it's not really ever going to use more memory. You can see that the page memory size and the VM size are not going up over time. The CPU count could potentially change over time, but it's not doing anything. So it's not really going to affect the CPU, but you know, it does feel dirty to leave that thing kind of just sitting out there hanging. Be aware of that. Don't just try to be good and try to remove your PS sessions rather than just closing the shell and forcing them to kind of sit there until they idle out. Now, version 3 of PowerShell introduces some new concepts around those sessions. For one, in version 2 of PowerShell, sessions are a little bit delicate. The right network hiccup at the wrong time and you lose your connection. And there's no way to reconnect to it either. In PowerShell 3, they're a little bit more robust. They're a little less fragile. So if you do get temporarily disconnected because of a network hiccup, it'll automatically reconnect the session for you. You can also manually disconnect a session, which allows it to sit running on the remote computer for a longer period of time. Let me show you how to do that. So let's, because there is another technique I wanted to make sure you saw too. All right, so let's do a new PS session. I'll just do it to a single computer, dc.lab.pri. I want to make sure I can use this. If you remember before, when I created a session, I popped them into a variable, and that does make them a lot easier to use. But you can also do this. Get PS session will get all of them, but if you use the computer name parameter, it will get you the sessions for the specified computer. So one thing you could do is enter PS session get PS session for computer name dc.lab.pri, and just in case I have more than one open, just select the first one, because this session parameter can only take a single session. And right now it just so happens that I do only have one open, but if I didn't, this command would grab the first open session to that computer and it would feed it to this, and so it would let me enter that. So it's kind of a way of you know, I don't know how many sessions I've got open. I don't really care. Just go get one. Oh, WinRM cannot process the request because I misspelled the computer name. There we go. Okay, so anyway, that's using those things. You can do that in version 2 as well. That same trick will work in V2. Let's do a get PS session, and now I'm going to disconnect that session. So you see now the state is disconnected and it is not available. Now I'm just going to close my window. Now if you remember in version 2, that would have pretty much killed any attempt to get to that session ever again. I'm going to open a new PowerShell window. This is essentially the same as going to a completely different computer, by the way. And let's get back to the root here. Get me a list of PS sessions on the computer name dc.lab.pri. Okay, there is a session sitting out on dc.lab.pri. It's currently disconnected. Awesome. Connect it for me. Great, now it's opened and available. Boom, I'm there. You notice it's quick too because it's already up and running. When I'm done with it, I can get PS session, remove PS session, and that'll close it. And I can run get PS session again. Yeah, just to verify that that worked. So the rules around this reconnecting, you have to explicitly disconnect. You can't just close the shell window or shut your computer down or whatever else. If you want to be able to reconnect, you have to explicitly disconnect because the shell has to be able to put it into this disconnected state. So this isn't exactly the same as like a remote desktop connection. You can't just close the window and then reconnect to it later. You have to manually disconnect it. And when you go to reconnect, it's only going to show you the sessions that you opened. So you've got to be running the shell as the same user account, or you have to have opened the session and provided a credential, and then get the session, provide that same credential. Because if you look at the help get PS session command, in addition to specifying a computer name, you can specify a credential. So that would be a username or a domain and username. It'll prompt you for the password. So anyway, when you go to retrieve those disconnected sessions, you can only get your own, and you can only reconnect to your own. So you can't just, again, it's not quite like remote desktop. You can't shadow someone else's session. There's no way to really see what's going on in someone else's session. All you would know is, well, if you ran a list of processes on the remote computer, you would see WSM prov hosts so that you would know someone was in remotely. You could dig in and see who was in remotely, but that's about it. So sessions are a big part of remoting, and they're a big part of what we're going to be using, particularly in the next nugget. Sessions work both in V2 and V3. They're a little bit more robust and can be manually disconnected and reconnected in version 3. So we've covered some basic session management, and I showed you how to use the disconnected sessions in PowerShell version 3. We also just covered basic use of sessions. Now, I do like popping those things into a variable. I think it makes them a lot easier to get to when you actually want to reuse the session. And in future nuggets where you see me using sessions, I will typically have those things living in a variable. Again, just to make it easier. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.